I'm very, very glad to be here for this 70th anniversary convention. And the topic of this convention, of this session, corporate governance, is something very close to my heart. I've been serving, as Bonnie mentioned, in several NGOs, both local and overseas. Now, I've seen the difference in board governance between local and international ones. So I'd like to take this opportunity to share with you my own observation of how the international NGOs expect the local NGOs to work with them. And thereby, we can learn, we, meaning local NGOs, can learn a lot from the international NGOs. Now, as Bonnie just said, I've been working with a number of international NGOs. United Way, another name is Community Chest. As you know, they raise money, a one-stop service for donors. Donors make a donation to United Way or Community Chest, and then the allocation committee of the United Way or Community Chest would allocate the money to worthy causes. The Habitat for Humanity is another well-established international NGO. Its mission is to provide decent and affordable housing, which is a subject very close to our heart in Hong Kong. We're talking about housing all the time. We're talking about decent and affordable housing. And Plan International is a service for children, children protection, children's health, education, children's rights, and the children's development. Another area where Hong Kong is very keen in developing. As our chief executive just said, government is now trying to set up a Children's Development Foundation. UNESCO Association, as the name implies, is a United Nations agency, but this is an NGO, community agency, and its mission is to promote peace, peace at all levels, not just political peace, but also community peace, environmental peace, and individual peace. And the other mission is sustainable development. It is now promoting the 17 SDG, Sustainable Development Goals, in Hong Kong. So I've been involved with all these organizations for quite a number of years, so I'm familiar with their expectations and also our local community's expectations. So I'll give you a brief account of these, how we work together to maximize our synergy. Now, these international NGOs have their own history, have their own mission, and as our earlier speaker mentioned, usually it's a question of prioritizing your mission. So we can roughly divide our international NGOs into three categories. One is giving advocacy the top priority. The second is program top priority. And third is fundraising. And as I mentioned just now, United Way is a fundraising organization. So to them, their objective and their KPI, if you like, is how much money you raise. Whereas Habitat for Humanity runs a lot of programs in mainland China from Hong Kong. For example, during the big earthquake in Sichuan many years ago, we raised money internationally and built 1,000 homes for villagers, victims of the earthquake. So we are program first. On the other hand, we have to raise money for these programs. So after program, we do fundraising. And Plan, I mentioned just now, provides children services. But in Hong Kong, we are given the task of fundraising. Plan, so an international NGO that separates their various officers, various affiliates in different parts of the world into two categories. One is so-called program countries, and the other is called fundraising countries. And this is a concept I've been criticizing. I say in this world, in this globalized world, you can't really separate the two. Programs and fundraising come hand in hand. And lastly, the fundraising first, program first, advocacy first, actually, they work together all the time. To be successful in fundraising, you've got to have good programs. And to persuade people to donate to you, you have to do advocacy. So you really, in corporate governance sense, you have to look at all three objectives. And what can the INGOs contribute? So really it's a question of what resources they can provide. And as we all know, international NGOs have a global reputation. They have many years of history. And they have high standard of credibility. So their branding, their credibility, and many years of their experience, expertise all over the world would be excellent background content for training of our local staff and local board members. And lastly, because they are international, they have big networks of corporate donors, big networks of local NGOs, different parts of the world, and it's a question of getting the, maximizing the synergy between all these entities from different parts of the world in order to achieve the mission. And of course, the international NGO have high expectations. In fact, they regard that as obligations of their local affiliates. They expect their local affiliates to meet their standard of service. After all, they're an international brand, so they have very high standard. For example, Habitat for Humanity has a manual called Standard of Excellence. And apart from standards, a very practical element, sharing of donations. And the sharing of these donations comes in two different ways. One is a percentage of funds raised locally payable to the international headquarters for their administration. And this varies from organization to organization. And some charge nothing, others charge 1% of your donations raised. Some charge as high as 3%, purely for the management of the international office. So that's an area where you have a difference of opinion. Because in Hong Kong, we are very conscious of our administration cost, the ratio. We always say that we should aim at 10% of administration cost, not more than 10% of funds raised. But if you have to give 3%, that's 1/3 to the international NGO, there's very little money left for the local administration. So that's an area of contention. And international NGOs realize that to be effective, to be successful locally, there must be a good governance. And therefore, they insist on high standard and efficient governance organization structure. And in order to keep donations coming, donors' rights, again, is an area where international NGOs really supervises very closely. And they want the local office to have a highly motivated team. But lastly, they are aware of the responsibility for finance, for their credibility. So they have international audit teams going around to every country to audit their accounts to make sure they meet their standards. And for local NGOs, of course, we also want the international headquarters to help us. And this help comes in different ways. Credibility apart, branding apart. We want them to give us money, especially for newly set up NGOs. And the ones I've been associated with, Habitat for Humanity, Plan International, we all started with a very generous so-called capacity building grant. And they of course have expectations, and I'm glad to say that after a few years of operation, our local affiliate have been able to repay the international NGO the full amount of the initial capacity building grant. Sorry about that. And of course, we use of synergy among affiliates, not just between the INGO and the local one, but among the local affiliates in different parts of the world. And they all work together to create a good marketing for the brand, for the programs. And we have to be aware that the international NGOs face a very difficult problem because they operate in so many different countries. United Way in 40-odd countries, planned in over 70 countries, UNESCO, 80-odd countries. So they all have different cultures, different beliefs, different philosophy, different faith. So the international NGOs have to take into account the local culture very much. And also the legal side, compliance with the local registration requirements, local, for example, who would be eligible for tax exemption locally under the tax benefits, the so-called Section 88 of our Inland Revenue Ordinance. And we want money from government, from other organizations, and a major source is often the lottery, the local lottery. And Hong Kong is no exception. Again, there are local regulations regarding lottery. So therefore, the international NGOs will have to help the local NGOs to comply with all these local requirements and maximize their fundraising ability. And we all work together to create shared value. We hope that the value we create can be shared by all. And the best way of doing that, the most effective way, is through collaborative governance. The local affiliate should have voice in the international NGOs board, and the international NGOs often require the local NGO to assign, to make a seat available on the board to the international NGOs representative. This is how we develop global policies effectively, develop global strategies. And also, through this collaborative governance, we can encourage, motivate local NGOs by making major recognition and awards. So, with all these INGOs operating in Hong Kong, with many of our local charity active persons sitting on the boards of these NGOs, which are affiliates of the INGOs. What lessons do we learn? What can we learn from them? So I think whatever the INGOs focus on, their major concern is actually governance. Boils down to governance. And therefore, their concern on governance should also be our local NGOs' major concerns. Things like achieving a consensus among all the stakeholders. This is something some of our local NGOs may not be conscious of, but it's very important that our stakeholders should all share the mission, the core value of our international NGOs, as well as our local ones. And of course, the international NGOs have rigorous standards of assessment for impact and for output. And again, impact outcome should be our local NGOs, governing bodies' major concern. And of course, we talk about strategy all the time. And another area which our local NGOs may not be fully aware of, but our international NGOs are very keen on, is our risk, the assessment of risk, management of risk. There have been several examples of risks not properly handled, crisis not properly handled, leading to major setbacks. And lastly, we all want our programs to be successful, our management to be successful, operation to be successful. Therefore, we should develop best practices. And the corporate governance side, the best practices are the ones which the international NGOs insist on. And again, this is something very important for our local NGOs to learn, because the best practice we have from social welfare department, for example, they have categories. Some you must adhere, observe, others optional. But with international NGOs, it's not optional. You've got to achieve their standards of excellence. So I do believe that learning from the INGOs, our local NGO governance can have a wider perspective, and can have strategies which will be sustainable and can maximize the synergy among all civil society partners in fulfilling our mission. Thank you.